It's my birthday, everyone, so here's my gift to you. Never Mess with Peter Parker by midnightwolf2192. Peter furiously swiped away the tears from his cheeks as he walked down the streets towards the tower. His day had started off great. Pepper had made him breakfast and had driven him to school. They'd even made plans for a movie night for just the two of them. He had aced both his history and Spanish pop quizzes, and Bucky had packed him a leftover lunch of Berziki, Bellini, and Bellini from the dinner the night before. So, yeah, his day had been going well. Until he remembered that Ned was out of state for a long weekend visiting family, and MJ was sick, meaning that he had to deal with Flash for the whole afternoon alone. Flash had his well-worn, extra comfortable douchebag pants on, and so he was in fine form. Peter could usually ignore the taunts, but without MJ and Ned as buffers, Flash was out for blood. One too many snide comments about Peter's family situation had the super teen snapping a pencil and begging to go to the nurse. When he arrived, Peter told the nurse he had a migraine, so she'd let him lie down. When asked if he wanted to call his guardians, Peter refused, stating they were in meetings that they wouldn't be able to get out of. The nurse left him alone after that, on the condition that he told her if he began to feel worse. While he was lying down, Peter messaged Happy and told him that Ned had invited him over to stay until Sunday, so he wouldn't need a lift until then. After similar messages were sent to Mr. Stark and Pepper, Peter put his phone down and shut his eyes. Mr. Stark and all the Avengers were spending the long weekend upstate at the compound, so Peter might be able to wrangle some time to himself at the tower. As much as he adored them, the Avengers could be very nosy, especially where Peter was concerned. Peter spent his last two classes in the nurse's office and left just before the end of the day. He had just finished packing his bag when the final bell rang and the hallway began to fill with people. Peter had attempted to duck out without being seen, but luck was never on his side. "Have a great weekend, penis!" Peter had to fight all his urges to duck away as Flash punched him in the arm, hard. "My parents are taking me to Vermont for the weekend. You should get your parents to take you." Peter shoved Flash away forcefully, surprising the bully with his strength, before storming off down the street. Once he was far away enough from Midtown, the tears began to fall. That led to now. Peter had jumped on the subway near his school, and after the short trip was walking towards the tower. When he finally arrived, Peter kept his head down as he swiped his ID badge and made his way through security. He crossed the lobby, head still bowed, and stepped into the Avengers' private elevator. "Penthouse, please, Fry," Peter said softly. "Of course, Peter. I thought you would be at the compound today," Friday said as the elevator began to move. "I'm not feeling 100%, Fry. Could you possibly not tell Mr. Stark I'm here?" Peter asked. "I'm completely healthy and he's busy. He doesn't need to deal with my teenage angst." "Are you sure, Peter? This is pushing the baby monitor protocol. Mr. Stark never minds being interrupted by you," Friday replied. "Please, Fry. I'm not going patrolling. I won't leave the tower or anything," Peter pleaded with the AI. "As you wish, Peter," Friday replied, and Peter smiled up at one of the cameras in the elevator. "You can always talk to me if needed, Peter." Friday's voice had Peter smiling wider. Only Tony Stark can make an AI sound caring. Peter stepped out of the elevator once it had reached the penthouse and walked straight into the kitchen. After loading his arms up with snacks, Peter walked down to his bedroom and locked the door. Next morning, Avengers compound. Tony walked into the communal kitchen and couldn't help but smile. All the Avengers were present, along with Pepper, and all were in varying stages of consciousness. Bucky and Sam were currently cooking the food. Nat was pouring a coffee while Clint hovered around her, wanting his own cup filled. Vision was sitting beside Wanda, playing with her hair, while the woman spoke with Pepper. Steve was reading the morning paper, and Rhodey was flicking through his phone. Bruce was flipping through what looked to be a chemistry report as he sipped at his tea. The only two still missing were Point Break and Peter. "Morning all," Tony said as he walked over to Pepper and pressed a kiss to her forehead before walking over to where Nat was already holding a coffee for him. "You are divine." Nat rolled her eyes fondly and eventually allowed Clint to have a cup as well. The Archer stuck his tongue out at her before perching up on the counter beside Sam and Bucky. "Where's my baby spider, Stark?" Nat asked as she took her seat beside Bruce. The scientist didn't look up from his work, but he did instinctually lift his arm for Nat to curl against him. "He sent me a message yesterday afternoon, saying he was staying at Ned's until Sunday. You will see him then," Tony explained. He was about to steal the paper from Steve when he noticed Wanda's confused expression. "What's up, Wanda?" "Are you sure that's what he said?" Wanda asked, and both Pepper and Tony nodded. Pepper pulled up a message on her phone and handed the device over to the other woman. "Wanda, what's the matter?" Clint asked firmly. He, Bucky, and Sam had turned away from the stove, and all three were staring at the young Sokovian with stern eyes. "It's just... Ned's not home this weekend," Wanda said. "Peter told me he was going out of state for the long weekend to visit family." Tony pulled his phone out of his pocket and frantically dialed Peter's number. The phone went straight to voicemail, and Tony took a few deep breaths. "Friday, baby, have you got a location for Peter?" Tony said. By now, all the Avengers were packing away their breakfast things and were getting ready to respond. "Boss, Peter is currently at the tower," Friday said, and all the Avengers stopped. "Is he safe, Friday?" Steve asked, and the AI hesitated. "Friday, status on Peter," Pepper ordered after the AI took a moment too long to answer. "When Peter arrived at the tower yesterday afternoon, he was upset and appeared to have been crying for some time. He took food from the kitchen and has not left his locked room since 4:33 p.m. yesterday. He did not go out patrolling last night, Mrs. Boss," Friday said, and that had the Avengers springing into action. Their baby spider was hurting and nothing would stop them. "Fry, have the Quinjets ready for takeoff in 10 minutes," Friday ordered, as the Avengers all fled the kitchen to make their way to their own rooms to change and get the things they would need. No one knew what kind of trouble their baby spider was in, so they all planned on being super prepared. "Why would he lie to us?" Pepper asked as she and Tony got changed. "I don't know, honey, but once we get there, I plan on finding out," Tony replied. He kissed Pepper on the lips and left her to finish getting ready. Tony pulled his phone out of his pocket and dialed Happy's number. "Boss, how can I help you?" Happy asked as soon as he picked up. "Happy, I need you to head to the tower," Tony ordered, and he heard his friend start moving around. "What happened?" Happy was alert and on edge at Tony's tone. "For some reason, Peter wasn't quite honest with us about yesterday. He's currently at the tower and has been locked in his room since yesterday afternoon," Tony explained. He made his way out of the communal area and headed towards the hangar. "We're about 2 hours out, but we are coming. I want you to try and find out what's wrong." "I'm on it," Happy said before hanging up the phone. Tony slid the phone back into his pocket and climbed into the Quinjet. He began running through the pre-flight checks as the others made their way to the hangar. Once everyone had arrived, Tony guided the jet out of the hangar and took off for the tower. While the Avengers were in transit, Happy had arrived at the tower and was currently in the elevator. He arrived at the penthouse and without hesitation made his way to Peter's bedroom door. "Pete, come on!" "Pete, come on, kid!" Happy called as he pounded on the door. He pressed his ear to the door, and if he strained, he could hear slight movement in the room. "Peter, I know you're in there. I need to know if you're hurt." "Spider Baby has asked me to relay that he is fine and to leave him alone." The last part of Friday's message was a recording of Peter's voice, and the bodyguard could hear that his voice was strained. "Peter, are you hurt?" Happy demanded when the original answer didn't satisfy him. "No, please, go away." Friday was now transmitting Peter's actual voice, and underneath the anger and annoyance, Happy could hear how upset he was. "Pete, I'm not going anywhere. I will be out here until you open the door," Happy said. He slid down the wall opposite Peter's door and locked his gaze firmly on the door. Meanwhile, Peter was curled up under his duvet, with his head buried under a pillow. He had hardly slept the night before, and whatever time he was spending awake was spent crying or wallowing. "You'll be waiting a while then," Peter mumbled into the pillow. While he had locked his door initially, he had webbed the floor closed with his web shooters. He had also webbed the air conditioning vent closed as well, just in case the Avengers returned and Clint attempted to come in that way. He had his blinds drawn, and while Disney Plus was projecting onto his wall, he wasn't paying attention to it. Happy pulled out his phone to apprise Tony of the situation. He dialed Pepper's number, knowing that Tony would be focused on flying the Quinjet. "Happy! How is he? Is he hurt?" The maternal tone to Pepper's frantic voice made Happy smile slightly, before he remembered why she was like that.
"He says he's fine, but I'm not convinced. The door is locked and he's refusing to come out. Plus, he sounds upset."
Happy relayed what was happening, and Pepper turned to relay it to the team.
"Friday, any injuries on Peter?"
"Negative, Mr. Hogan. No injuries that I could ascertain," Friday replied through both the tower speakers and the Quinjet speakers. "Happy, tell him we are coming," Pepper said firmly. "Let him know that I am expecting him to pick trashy movies for our movie night."
"Will do, Mrs. Boss. If anything changes, I'll keep you apprised,"
Happy replied before hanging up the phone.
"Kid, Pep wants me to tell you that they are all on their way. She wants you to pick trashy movies for your movie night together. You know Tones will get jealous of you and Pepper having movie nights without him."
Inside the room, Peter rolled his eyes but climbed out of the bed. The Avengers were serious mother hens. Peter attached his web shooters to his wrists and proceeded to fire more webs at both the door and the vents. He covered the door handle, door jamb, and even the gaps in the door with webs, before repeating the actions with the vents. He even went so far as to reinforce his windows with webs, because, knowing Tony, he would probably attempt to blast the window if he couldn't get in the door. Now that he was up, Peter decided to use the bathroom before the Avengers made their presence known. After sealing up the vents in his attached ensuite and doing his business, Peter stared at himself in the mirror. He had deep black bags under his eyes, and he honestly looked frightful. He splashed some cold water onto his face before returning to his bed. He pulled the duvet back up to his chin and softly ordered Friday to start playing the cartoon version of Robin Hood. 2 hours from their initial correspondence about Peter, the Avengers landed at the tower. After shutting the jet down, the entire team raced towards the elevator.
"Friday, any change?"
Tony asked as the elevator began its descent. "Negative, boss. Spider Baby has not yet left his room," Friday replied. The group exchanged worried glances before the elevator doors opened.
"Tony, I'm going into the vents. He may have locked the door, but I may be able to get in that way,"
Clint said, and Tony nodded. "I'm on your 6, Nat said. Clint nodded, and with a boost from Sam, both spies were soon crawling through the vents. The other Avengers made their way down the hall and found Happy sitting outside Peter's room. "Peter, honey, please let me in," Pepper called gently as she knocked on the door. The Avengers waited with bated breath, but nothing happened. "Peter, please, I'm worried." "I'm fine, Pep. Please leave me alone," Friday transmitted Peter's words, and the Avengers shared a glance.
"No can do, kid. Come on, Pete. We're worried,"
Tony said as he stepped forward. "Well, I'm fine. Everyone is overreacting." This time it wasn't Friday transmitting the message, but Peter's actual voice calling out, "And please go away. I will come out when I'm ready. And tell Clint and Tasha to get out of the vents." The Avengers all shared another look before Tony indicated to the kitchen. Happy motioned that he would stay in the hallway while the others turned and headed for the kitchen.
"Fry, pull up the video feed in Peter's room,"
Tony said as he pulled out a Stark pad. While all the Avengers' rooms had cameras in them, they were never accessed unless there was a dire need. The only other time the cameras had been accessed was when Bucky had had such severe nightmares that he had physically thrown Steve out of their room and barricaded the door. They had used the cameras as to keep an eye on him until he had come back to himself enough to respond to them. The Avengers in the private rooms ran on their own server, so they were unhackable, and all footage was deleted after 48 hours. Soon, the Avengers could clearly see Peter in his room. He was lying in his bed under the covers, with the Aristocats now playing on the wall. Tony moved the camera and noticed all the webbing.
No one is getting in that room until he decides,
Tony said as he pointed out the webs to the others. After a minute, Nat and Clint returned to the kitchen.
Couldn't get in, could you? Who's webbed it shut? Couldn't even see through them,
Clint replied, and Nat frowned. The female spy turned on her heel and walked back down the hall. She tapped gently on the door, using the secret knob that she and Peter had developed. Please, Mama Spider, go away. I'm fine. I just want to be left alone, Peter said in Russian. Nat smiled softly at her native language. Could hear the pain voice. I can't do that, little one. I am deeply concerned. You know, Natasha replied. She heard Peter sigh. Mr. Stark will surely have the cameras on me. Please go. Peter finished his statement, and Nat heard footsteps walking away from the door.
My turn,
Tony said as he crossed paths with Nat. Nat stopped and looked back at the closed bedroom door. Stark, he's hurting. Every instinct in me wants to break that door down, Nat said softly. She hated admitting weakness, but with her baby spider on the line, she felt vulnerable.
I know, Tasha. We'll figure this out,
Tony replied. The spy nodded and walked back to the kitchen.
Why?
Came Peter's frustrated growl. Before Tony could answer, Peter continued,
Is Santa Claus here?
He pressed his hand to the door and took a few deep breaths.
Pete, if you could just let me in, only for 5 minutes,
Tony pleaded.
I swear, 5 minutes and I'm gone. You can web the door to your heart's content then, I promise.
Silence descended, and Tony was just about to retreat. To regroup, when he heard the hiss of a spray bottle, followed by the sound of the door opening. Tony pushed open the bedroom door and watched as Peter walked back over to the bed and pulled his knees up to his chest.
Fry, set a timer for 5 minutes,
Tony ordered before crossing the room. Peter's curls were completely unruly, and Tony couldn't resist the urge to brush some strands away from the teenager's face.
Buddy, why did you tell us you were staying with Ned?
'Cause then you guys would leave me alone, Peter whispered into his knees. I had a really shit day yesterday and wanted to be alone.
Pete, we would have left you alone if you asked,
Tony said, and Peter raised his head, finally. He raised one eyebrow in disbelief, and Tony held up his hands in surrender.
Okay, I see your point. We can be a little overbearing, can't we?
Just a bit, Peter said with a soft giggle. He sobered quickly, and Tony soon found himself with an armful of teenager. Peter curled into Tony's side and rested his head over Tony's heart. The older man ran his fingers through Peter's hair to soothe the obviously conflicted teen. Tony, why are people cruel?
Oh, I wish I knew the answer, buddy,
Tony replied. Peter nuzzled further into Tony's chest, seeking comfort from his father figure.
What's got you so down, bud?
Before Peter could respond, Friday's timer went off.
End, Fry,
Tony said.
You gave me 5 minutes, Pete. Thank you. Do you want me to leave? I did swear to be gone after 5 minutes.
Stay, please, Peter replied, and Tony smiled. He squeezed Peter's shoulder and pressed a kiss to his curls.
No. What's got you down?
Tony asked again, and Peter frowned. Promise not to get mad, Peter whispered, and Tony tensed. I'll tell you, but only if you promise. Fry, repeat that request to the others. I know they're listening.
I promise to hear you out. I will promise to keep my cool. But, Pete, if someone has hurt you, I can't promise not to get mad,
Tony said diplomatically. The Avengers support boss's statement, Baby Spider, Friday relayed, and Peter sighed. I guess that's the best I'm gonna get, Peter said before taking a deep breath. I've been bullied since middle school. Tony let out a hiss that he knew would be echoed by the other Avengers, but kept his mouth shut otherwise. He had promised to hear Peter out. Normally, I can deal with it, Peter continued, when he realised Tony wasn't planning on interrupting. It's usually only taunts and name-calling, rarely physical. Normally I have Ned and MJ with me, and that helps to buffer everything.
But they weren't there yesterday,
Tony filled in, and Peter nodded. Ned's out of state, and MJ was sick, Peter explained. Yesterday, my bully was in fine form. He just kept pushing all my buttons, and it became too much. I spent my last 2 classes in the nurse's office.
Pete, what was he saying?
Tony asked through clenched teeth. The idea of anyone picking on his kid was setting off all his paternal instincts. That my parents died to get away from me, Peter said softly, and they both heard the smashing of a glass from the kitchen. He kept taunting me about my lack of parents and said that people just died to get away from me. He then made a point to rub it into my face that he was going away this weekend with his parents. Before Tony could muster up a response, the bedroom door flew open and a furious Bucky was filling up the doorframe. He instantly approached the bed and pulled Peter from Tony's arms and into his own. Bucky sat down at Peter's desk, mumbling in Russian as he hugged the boy tightly and stroked his hair. Peter could only make out occasional words, but the words he could make out included
death, murder, accident,
and the phrase,
no more. This is fucking unacceptable.
Peter was stunned to hear that coming from Captain Steve Language Rogers. It wasn't unusual for him to swear on the battlefield, but he always kept it G-rated in the tower or compound, unless he got scared or really, really angry. Peter looked over at the Avengers as they filled his room. Bruce had a slight green tinge to his face. Wanda's eyes were flashing a violent red colour. Clint was clenching his hand, no doubt feeling for a phantom bow. Vision was attempting to calm Wanda while also glaring at the wall, and both Rhodey and Sam were gritting their teeth while both resting hands on the furious super soldier. I want full names, my little spider, Natasha hissed as she approached Bucky. The former assassin clutched the boy tighter to him, but at Nat's glare, allowed her to approach and run her fingers through Peter's hair. No one hurts my baby spider. No one. I will be calling the school on Tuesday, Pepper said with finality. Peter looked over at her and frowned. Pepper locked her gaze with him and smiled sadly. Peter, honey, I know you don't want any fuss, but this is beyond unacceptable. I will not stand by and allow my son to be tormented in a place he should feel safe. Peter's head shot up from where it was resting on Bucky's chest, and he looked between Pepper and Tony. Neither one appeared flustered. In fact, they both had wide smiles on their faces. The other Avengers, besides Bucky, who was still too angry to process much, were now smiling from ear to ear. Yes, Peter, you heard right, Pepper said softly as she approached Bucky. The Winter Soldier allowed her to approach with no more than a soft huff of annoyance. Even trained assassins were terrified of the wrath of one Pepper Potts Stark. The woman knelt in front of the chair and took Peter's hand in hers. I may not have given birth to you, but you are my son, and I will protect you with every fibre of my being.
Same goes for me, Pete. I've always wanted a son, and I think I've been given the best one,
Tony said as he stood behind Pepper and rested a hand on her shoulder. Peter smiled tearily up at the couple, and knowing that Bucky wouldn't be relinquishing his hold any time soon, lifted Pepper's hand and kissed her knuckles. We love you, Peter. You are a part of this family, and I won't let some snot-nosed brat let you think otherwise.
Just give us his name, kid, and he's done for," Sam said firmly. "No one messes with this family."
"I love you guys," Peter whispered. Bucky pulled him in tighter. "We love you too, little hero."
"We love you too, little hero,"
Bucky whispered into his hair.
"Well, come on,"
Tony said after a moment. Everyone looked up at him and noticed the wicked gleam in his eye.
"It's time for a family outing. Everyone pack a suitcase with enough clothes for a few days and meet in the living room in 15 minutes.
"What have you got planned?" Pepper asked fondly, as Tony helped her to stand.
"Family trip. I guarantee that ours will be way better than that little douchebag's. 15 minutes, people,"
Tony ordered before racing out of the room, dialing his phone as he went. The rest of the Avengers dispersed slowly, each one ruffling Peter's hair before they left. Soon only Natasha and Bucky were left in Peter's room. "Hey, Uncle Bucky. Want to help me pack?" The title shook Bucky out of his thoughts, and the Brooklyn native smiled widely at the teen. Bucky kissed Peter's forehead and allowed him to escape the tight grasp. Peter approached Natasha and wrapped his arms around her waist tightly. "Pepper is my mum, but you are my Mama Spider and my Auntie Tasha. Love you." "I love you too, little one," Natasha replied as she kissed his head. Bucky pulled a suitcase out of Peter's cupboard, and the three of them carefully packed the things they might need. After they finished in Peter's room, Bucky and Peter walked out to the living room to wait for the others. Bucky reasoned that Steve would probably pack for him anyway, while Natasha returned to her own room to pack. 15 minutes later, the Avengers were making their way to the hangar where the Quinjet was waiting to take them to the airport. Peter kept pressing Tony, but the billionaire just smiled fondly and refused to answer. At the airport, the group boarded Tony's private plane, and after 10 minutes, they were in the air.
"Don't forget to take pictures, kid. Gotta show Ted and MJ,"
Tony teased from his seat, and Peter nodded. He pulled out his phone and instantly made his way over to Wanda. The Sokovian pulled the teenager down into her lap, and Peter took a selfie with them as Wanda kissed his cheek. The phone was then handed to Vision so that he could take a few shots of the pair. The phone and Peter both made their way around the plane, and soon as camera roll was filling with ridiculous selfies, candid shots and posed shots of all the Avengers. Probably one of Peter's favourites was a candid photo Rhodey had taken of Peter sitting in between Pepper and Tony, both their arms around him and Pepper pressing a kiss to his temple. Tony had been smiling fondly at the pair, and Peter had a huge grin on his face. It was quickly made his phone lock screen. A few hours later, the plane began its descent. Tony was still refusing to tell the group where they were going, but he was smiling fondly at all of them as they tried to guess. They all disembarked, and it was only then that they realized they were in Los Angeles.
"Tony, are we going where I think we're going?"
Peter asked after a minute, and turned to the older man. Tony smirked and Peter let out a soft squeal.
"We are going to Disneyland, aren't we?"
"Of course we are. And I may just decide to return you to New York by Tuesday, but I make no promises," Tony said with a wink.
Peter launched himself at the older man and wrapped him up in a tight hug. The hug was soon joined by an excited Wanda, who had always wanted to go to the theme park, but hadn't found the time.
"All right, guys, come on. There's fun to be had."
The group of Avengers separated themselves into the waiting cars, and within minutes, they were headed for Anaheim.
"I can't believe you just decided to take us to Disneyland,"
Peter said. He was practically vibrating with excitement as they drove. Pepper smiled fondly at him and leant over to press a kiss to his head.
"But of course. It's the happiest place on earth, and my kid deserves some fun,"
Tony said, and Peter stopped vibrating enough to hug the man tightly before pressing his face against the window to watch the scenery. Pepper took Tony's hand in hers, and Tony kissed her knuckles gently. He lived to see his family happy. Half an hour later, the cars pulled into the Disneyland car park. Peter and Wanda burst out of the cars and were jumping around excitedly. The adults followed with fond smiles on their faces, and Tony, once everyone was ready, led the group to the entranceway.
"We definitely have to go to Galaxy's Edge,"
Peter said as he and Wanda pored over the map of the venue.
"And Tomorrowland.
I need to ride Thunder Mountain Railroad and the Matterhorn, Wanda added, and Peter nodded. Kids, remember, we are here for 3.5 days. We will have plenty of time to do everything, Pepper said, and both Wanda and Peter nodded at her. The group took their tickets and entered the main gates, with Peter with the widest grin of all. We need a family photo, Natasha said, and Pepper grabbed a few tourists and asked them to take the picture. The group assembled themselves around the Walt Disney statue, and Peter handed the woman his phone. After a few photos, the group thanked the stranger before making their way further into the park.
Okay, where to first?
Steve asked, and Peter and Wanda looked around frantically. Frontierland, Peter said with finality. Wanda smiled gratefully and pressed a kiss to Peter's head before grabbing his wrist and taking off running. The Avengers trailed the excited children, their own excitement growing as the kids let go and acted like the teenagers they were. For the next few days, Peter was in absolute heaven. He had spent the first half of Saturday exploring Galaxy's Edge and rode the 2 rides in that area multiple times. After lunch, he and Bucky decided to explore Toontown and Fantasyland, while the others broke off and did their own things. Pepper and Natasha returned to the resort, planning to take advantage of California's sun. Steve, Clint, Sam, and Rhodey headed over to California Adventure. Tony, Bruce explored Tomorrowland, while Wanda and Vision went back to Frontierland. Despite Tony's best efforts, Monday night meant the group had to return to New York. Pepper still had a company to run, and Peter had to go back to school. On the plane home, Peter had been so tired that he had curled himself up in Tony's lap, much to the man's excitement. Pepper had taken several dozen photos, and Steve had even sketched the scene. Instead of waking him up when they arrived in New York, Tony carefully carried Peter to Happy's waiting car and slid into the back seat, Pepper following him. Peter whispered sleepily as the car went over a bump, jostling him slightly.
Go back to sleep, Bambino,
Tony said softly as he pressed a kiss to Peter's curls. Okay. Love you, Mum. Love you, Dad, Peter replied sleepily before dropping back off. Pepper and Tony exchanged excited looks, and Tony sent a text to the other Avengers.
Our son is the best,
Tony whispered to Pepper, who nodded and kissed both of them on the head. When they arrived at the tower, Bucky took Peter from Tony's arms so that Tony could exit the car, and when Tony tried to take the teen back, Bucky refused.
Uncle Bucky wants Peter cuddles,
Bucky said when Tony pouted. That started the male Avengers off, all of them demanding the title uncle. You're all my uncles. Now shut up. Peter's sleepy voice broke through their performance, and the Avengers smiled at their youngest member. Peter, oblivious to the looks, turned his head further into Bucky and nuzzled his chest. The group rode the elevator to the penthouse, and Bucky carried the sleeping teen into his room. With the help of Steve and Natasha, he tucked the young boy in, and the trio left the room. The next morning, Peter rose, feeling well rested and ready to take on the world. He ran through a shower and got dressed for school, all while blasting the Hamilton soundtrack through Friday's speakers.
Morning, Pete,
Bruce said as Peter entered the kitchen. He and Steve were the only ones present at 7 a.m., the others still asleep.
Sleep well?
Of course, Uncle Bruce. I had the best, most tiring weekend ever with my family. Nothing was going to keep me from sleep.
At the title, Bruce blushed happily. Peter grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl on the bench and looked at his watch.
I've got to get to school. Bye, Uncle Bruce. Bye, Uncle Steve. Tell Mum and Dad I say bye.
It was only as Peter was climbing into Happy's car that he realized what he had called Tony and Pepper.
Uncle Happy,
Peter said, and the teenager held back a smirk as the man's head violently snapped around. The grin on Happy's face was worth it, though.
Do you think Tony and Pepper will be upset if I called them Mum and Dad to their faces?
Kid, I think that would make not only their day, but their entire lives,
Happy replied.
Thanks, Uncle Hap,
Peter said. The rest of the drive passed in silence, and soon Happy was pulling up outside Midtown High.
Have a good day, Uncle Happy.
You too, kid. You too,
Happy replied. Once Peter was inside the school, Happy pulled away from the curb with a huge grin on his face. Peter opened his locker and was pulling out his textbooks when he heard footsteps stop beside him. He closed his locker and smiled at his best friend. "Hey, Ned, how was Hawaii?" Peter asked as he hugged his friend. "As good a trip with my family can be without my best friend," Ned replied. "How was your weekend?" "Get up too much?"
"Did I ever?"
Peter said. He pulled out his phone, opened the camera roll, and handed it to Ned. Ned let out an excited squeak and started flicking through the pictures of Peter and the Avengers and their trip to Disneyland.
"It was seriously amazing."
"Do! Jealous!" Ned cried, and Peter nodded. "Tell me about it." The first bell rang, meaning they couldn't talk about it now, but Peter was practically vibrating in excitement. For whatever reason, Peter felt higher than life. "What's got you losers so excited?" MJ asked the pair of them when she joined them at their lunch table. Ned was flicking through Peter's phone, asking questions about every photo, and Peter was happily obliging him with stories. "Peter spent the weekend at Disneyland with the Avengers!" Ned said excitedly, and MJ raised an eyebrow at him. Ned handed MJ the phone and urged her to look at it. "Seriously!" "Looks like a good weekend, Parker," MJ said as she handed the phone back to Peter. Peter slid the phone into his pocket, just as Flash made his presence known. "Sup, penis? How was your weekend?" Flash asked snidely. "Mine was fantastic. My parents completely treated me to the most relaxing weekend ever." "Did you have a good time with your parents?"
"Flash, seriously, just fuck off,"
Peter said before MJ could interject on his behalf. He had had the best weekend with his family, and knowing that he had people to support him gave him confidence. "What did you just say?" Flash hissed out, and both Ned and MJ shot him confused but impressed looks.
"Flash, I envy every person who hasn't met you yet. I'm having a nice lunch with my friends, so kindly fuck off,"
Peter demanded. His spidey sense went haywire as Flash let out a growl and towered over him. The other teen grabbed Peter by the back of his shirt and, without preamble, lifted Peter and punched him square in the face. Both MJ and Ned let out cries of anger as Peter slumped to the ground. "Watch your tone, penis! Remember, you are no one!" Flash hissed before storming out of the cafeteria. MJ pressed some napkins to Peter's bleeding nose, while Ned raced over to the drink machine to grab some ice. "While I'm proud, what was that?" MJ asked as she attempted to stem the blood flow. Ned returned and wrapped a few ice cubes into a handful of napkins and pressed them to Peter's slowly swelling nose and eye.
"I'm just sick of him," Peter replied. "I'm sick of being a doormat."
"I'm proud, Parker. Now, come on. You need to head to the nurse to get cleaned up," MJ ordered. She and Ned helped Peter to stand, and they walked out of the still silent cafeteria. Just as Peter had expected, no one else stood up to Flash, everyone choosing to just stare at their lunch. As Peter, MJ, and Ned made their way down to the nurse's office, the group heard Peter's name being called.
"Peter, honey, what the hell happened?"
Pepper's tone was torn between fury and maternal as she looked at her son's face. Both MJ and Ned were speechless at the sight of their heroes, and Peter just smiled awkwardly.
"Hi, Mum,"
Peter said, and while Pepper's eyes softened at the term, they soon returned to its hard, furious state.
"I thought you told us it didn't get physical,"
Pepper demanded. She moved the napkins and ice away to look at Peter's face.
"This looks physical to me."
"If I may, Miss Potts, this happened because Peter actually stood up for himself," MJ said respectfully. Peter would have been smirking at his friend's obvious hero worship, but his face was really starting to hurt. "Pep, the principal's waiting for us, and Elsa is getting restless." Tony's voice echoed down the hallway, and soon the man joined them. "Pep, Peter, what the hell happened?" At the sound of Tony's yelling, the office door burst open and Bucky raced out, followed by Principal Marita. Bucky took one look at Peter's face and let out a savage growl. He took prowling steps towards the teen and cupped the non-injured side of his face in his flash hand. Peter noticed that his metal hand was flexing rhythmically. "Mr. Parker, what happened?" Principal Morita asked as he too joined the scene. Sir, Flash punched Peter in the face. Something he's been doing for years, Ned commented, feeling bold with some of the Avengers surrounding him. Peter actually stood up to him today and told him to back off, which is why my best friend is now sporting a black eye and a broken nose. Mr. Parker, is this true? Has Mr. Thompson been bullying you? Principal Morita asked.
Yes, sir,
Peter answered without removing his gaze from Bucky. He was trying to keep his face and tone neutral, so as to not set off the full Winter Soldier mode.
He has been harassing me since middle school.
He's dead. He just hasn't fallen over yet,
Bucky whispered softly, so that only Peter could hear.
Mr. Parker, head to the nurse with your family, and I will call for Mr. Thompson. I am terribly sorry this has happened. We will sort it out straight away,
Principal Morita said, and Peter nodded.
Miss Jones, Mr. Leeds, please head to class. Thank you for your help.
All right, message us later, loser, MJ said affectionately, and both she and Ned left the area. Mr. Parker, I'm afraid this will hurt. Your nose is broken and needs to be reset, the nurse said apologetically. Peter winced but nodded in understanding.
Could Uncle Bucky reset it for me?
Peter asked softly, and the nurse smiled. She nodded in approval and turned to make up another ice pack and get some ibuprofen for him.
I'm sorry, little hero. This will hurt,
Bucky said. Peter nodded and lay on the bed. While Pepper and Tony watched, Bucky ran his palms down either side of Peter's nose and reset the cartilage.
Breathe, little hero. You have to breathe through the pain.
While this was happening, Principal Morita had called Flash into his office. Flash had strutted in, thinking that there was something good. He soon lost all confidence when he saw the angry look on Morita's face. Mr. Thompson, it has come to my attention that you have been bullying a fellow student. Principal Morita said firmly. No, sir, Flash replied. If this was about who he thought it was about, Penis was dead. Before anything else could be said, the secretary opened the door and Peter walked in. Flash was about to start posturing when he noticed who was walking in behind Parker. Pepper Potts, Tony Stark, and the Winter fucking Soldier were all entering the room and surrounding Peter. Now, Mr. Thompson, Mr. Parker has some things he is planning on telling us. And just so everyone is aware, I will be recording this interview, Principal Morita said before nodding to Peter. Without looking at his fellow teenager, Peter told the whole story of Flash's bullying, detailing things he said about Peter's family situation and the nicknames he had been given. Sir, with all due respect, Parker brought all of it upon himself, Flash said, trying to scrape up some sympathy. He didn't see Peter latching onto Bucky's arm, or Pepper latching onto Tony to stop either man from killing the teen. He's been rubbing his fake internship into my face since he got it.
Actually, Flash, I have never once rubbed it into your face. Every time it has been brought up, it was you who said it,
Peter deadpanned. Flash opened his mouth to protest, but Peter held up his hand to silence him.
You are the one who has been fixating on it. The only time I have ever spoken about it was to continually justify its validity. Never have I lorded it over other people's heads. In fact, I offered tips to people like Abe and Cindy on how to apply for internships at Stark Industries.
How dare you say Peter's internship is fake?
Tony hissed out, and Flash paled.
Peter has been my personal intern for over a year now. In fact, he's one of the best employees my company has. Do you know how many section heads have requested his presence in their labs? All of them! Even Pep's legal teams want him to intern with them. This kid, right here, is officially the smartest person in the room in pretty much every room he enters. He is also the best person I know. Who are you to attempt to belittle him?
Thank you, Mr. Stark, Principal Morita said, attempting to regain some control. Mr. Thompson, this behavior is unacceptable. It appears that this is not a new occurrence. And with that in mind, your parents have been called,
and I will be suspending you for 3 weeks. You can't do that!
Flash yelled. Bucky moved and placed himself between Peter and the bully, just in case Flash tried something.
My father donates a ton of money to this school. You suspend me and he will pull all funding faster than you can blink.
Don't threaten me, Mr. Thompson. This school has survived without your father's money before, and will continue to do so after. Marita hissed firmly. Flash slumped back in his seat. You will be suspended for 3 weeks. And another outburst like that will just extend the suspension. You will also be removed from any teams you are a part of, including academic decathlon. You will not be allowed to rejoin any of the teams. And don't worry about funding, Pepper said. Should Mr. Thompson pull minimal funding he provides, Stark Industries will not only match it, but will exceed it. Principal Marita, just inform me if there is anything Stark Industries can do to assist with the funding for this school.
Mr. Thompson, that is all.
Please wait in the front office for your parents. They have been called, and once they arrive, I will be telling them everything, Principal Marita ordered. Flash stood and glared at Peter. He looked as though he wanted to say something, but the fierce glare Bucky was shooting him quelled his actions. Flash stomped out of the room and slammed the door behind him.
Mr. Parker, I can never express how sorry I am that you have had to put up with this behavior.
Hello, Fizzy. Hello. Hello. Do you want to say hi to my lovely listeners? Yes, I love you too. Now calm down. I'm nearly finished, okay? Yeah, you're happy it's my birthday too, aren't you? Yeah, you love me. And I love you, my little ginger snap. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Now please go and lie down. I'm busy. No, you can't have the microphone. Shh, shh. It's okay, girl. Shh.
Sir, if anything, it was my fault. When Bucky and Tony attempted to protest, Peter continued, I never mentioned it to anyone. I didn't want to make a fuss, because if he was bullying me, he would leave the other kids alone. But when he went after my family, I had to draw the line.
I am so proud that you never got physical in return, Mr. Parker. I am still sorry that this has happened,
Principal Marita said.
Is there anything I can do to make up for this?
Maybe, Peter said, and Pepper raised an eyebrow. I haven't spoken to my parents yet, but I was wondering what the process was to test out for sophomore class and into junior year.
May I ask why, Mr. Parker? Marita asked.
Honestly, sir, I'm bored, Peter replied. The work I do through my internship has meant that I'm already far ahead in chemistry and physics. I was just wondering if it was possible to move up a grade. I understand if it's not. I just thought I'd ask.
We haven't had someone do that yet, but I'm sure it's possible. You have a near-perfect GPA, so I can't imagine there would be any objections from your teachers, Principal Marita said. Let me see what I can do, and I'll get back to you. Is that all right?
Perfectly, Principal Marita, Pepper said. Thank you so much for your time today. I do want to let you know that we will be keeping Peter home for the rest of the week, just until his eye and nose heal up. Could you organise for his work to be emailed for him?
Of course, Mrs. Stark. Thank you for being so reasonable, Principal Marita said. He stood and shook hands with the 3 adults in the room. Mr. Parker, I will email you about testing out for sophomore year once I work out the details. The small group exited the office and Peter simply lifted his head as Flash glared at him. Bucky let out a soft hiss as they passed the teen, but Peter's grip kept the ex-assassin grounded.
Peter, how is your head? Pepper asked once the group was securely in Happy's car. Bit sore. The ibuprofen did nothing, so I have a bit of a headache, Peter replied. Dad, would Dr. Cho have anything stronger that might help?
We can ask once we get to the tower, Tony said with a proud smile on his face. I am so beyond proud of you, son. You amaze me every day.
Peter smiled back and curled into Tony's side. Here, surrounded by some of his family, while heading home to the rest of the family, Peter had never felt safer. End of story. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that. And yes, it is my birthday. I will not tell you how old I am, but I wanted to give you guys something special. I've been holding on to that one for a while, and it was Midnight Wolf's return to writing fan fiction. This is quite an old story, But I absolutely love it, and you guys know I'm obsessed with Disneyland, and I'm actually planning on going back. Now, for apologies, I'm very sorry about if you can hear my dog, because I'm not editing out that cute bit with her, but if you can hear her, otherwise, sorry. Her name's Fizz, and she's lovely, and I love her to pieces, but when I'm recording with her in the room, it's a little tricky. And I'm also sorry about audio quality. I'm in a different room, and I'm very sorry if you can hear power tools in the background. I work different hours than the typical 9 to 5, so I can hear people in the village I live in doing their garden work, basically. Anyway, on to what I love about this. I'm so sorry for little Peter. I mean, no one deserves that. Flash, seriously? Seriously? Get a life. And just Tony taking all of them to Disneyland, and Peter almost immediately calling them auntie and uncle, and saying that Pepper and Tony are his mum and dad, and making sure Nat knows she's still his mama spider. Bucky getting Peter cuddles. Oh, my heart. And him immediately going to Frontierland with Wanda because she wants to go to Thunder Mountain. Now, I've been to Disneyland Paris, as those of you who watch my video will be aware, but I didn't go on that, though I'm planning next time I go because I am going back. I've already booked it. Pro tip, go in January, February time. That's the best time if you've got it. It's so cheap. Anyway, yes, so happy birthday to me. Not to brag, but this is the one day of the year people celebrate me, and I'm not going to apologise for it. So yeah, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe, and hit that bell to get notified for whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.